tenants are being taken care of as well. And I value those relationships because it makes us a better company. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Bennion. She'll talk about some of the bills that are coming forth in the next legislative session, what she's anticipating. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think this is wonderful having this conference. I was able to join earlier, and then I had to go to another meeting I'm at, but I'm glad to be back. And I just wanted to let you know my background relating to housing. Growing up, my parents were landlords. That's how they made their living. My dad was a developer also. And so I saw the risks that you as landlords take. I saw the heartbreaks that sometimes comes because of high interest rates and things. And then I married, my spouse went through medical school through the Air Force. So we were a military family for 26 years, and we were renters for at least 15 of those years. So I know the valuable product that you give to us as families and as individuals when we don't have either the income or the stability to be able to purchase a home, that we are able to rent and have housing. So you provide something that's very intimate and very so needed. And when I was elected in 2020, I was drawn to study housing because even back then, the housing costs were so high. And I was concerned for our children, for our teachers, for our first responders who want housing and whose incomes are not keeping up with the rising housing costs. So I've been studying housing for 2 years, and that has allowed me to learn a lot about our state policy. We are a tremendous state in so many ways, but early on, I was in a meeting that was where they released a report on our state statute, and it was called the Justice Lab report. And we'll talk about some of the state statute during this meeting. And it really puts tenants at a disadvantage. This report, released in 2020, showed that when we compared Utah to the other states in our federal court district, we have the weakest tenant laws. And we want a playing field that leaves our landlords whole and our property managers strong, but also enables tenants to be thriving. And so as I've continued to study this, there have been 2 working groups that I've been able to be part of this summer. And I'm going to ask if Rochelle can share my slides, that would help. If she can't, I'll just keep talking.
I'll pull it up right now. Sorry. Yep.
Okay. The first working group is come from a report that came out from the Utah Bar Foundation. The Utah Bar Foundation is focused on finding ways to make law the best it can in our state. And every 10 years, they do a deep study about unmet legal needs. And in 2019, when they did this study, they found, not surprisingly, that debt collection is an unmet legal need. It makes sense that when you are in debt, that you don't have funds to pay for an attorney. And they partnered with Pew Charitable Trust and did a further deep dive into that. So that report came out in April. And based on that report, there were enough recommendations in that report that Representative Marcia Judkins and we started a working group. Marcia Judkins is based in Utah County and is a Republican, and I'm a Democrat. And this has been a wonderful collaboration because we both care about our landlords and property managers and tenants and want the best outcomes for all of them. And one of the important things from this report is that whenever we can, we need to prevent evictions because they are so costly to landlords. The study found that landlords are not made whole through the eviction process. And this, maybe we can hold right here at this one. We're going to talk about in our state statute. It is in our state statute and policy that if someone is evicted, they have mandatory treble damages if they are not out of their home within 3 days or have paid up, and made arrangements with their landlords. So you can see here how quickly that escalates, how much they owe because of treble damages. And this study, another thing it found is that Utah is the only state that gives just 3 business days for someone to be out of there or have paid up with their landlord, and then assesses mandatory treble damages. The judge cannot intervene. If there's a medical issue or something else one of us might say, well, that seems like they shouldn't get treble damages. The judge can't intervene. Maybe we can go to the next slide. This is another finding from that study that came out in April, that the amount in controversy, the median amount is only $640. But you can see how quickly that judgment moves up. And some of that is court costs. When we can keep these court cases out of the district court increases the cost by 4 times. So there's a separate working group looking at the justice system, seeing maybe we need to have a different type of court to hold mediation, these types of cases and keep them out of district court. But part of that also is the treble damages. And maybe we can go to the next slide. Okay. And we won't talk about this one, but you can be looking at it, or we can just go back to my face. I don't. So when we prevent evictions, that is a win for everybody. We have been working with Heather Lester, who is the director for Utah Community Action, and they work upstream to prevent evictions. They've had 295 mediations this year, which resulted in 245 people and families retained in housings. They prevented 65 evictions, but did have 16. They held 65 classes on landlord-tenant issues and have an average log of 150 calls per month to try and help people stay out of evictions. So as we look at preventing evictions, there will be a bill this session. I don't think it's numbered yet, from Representative Jennifer Daly Provost. And her bill would create a pilot program. It would put out a request for appropriations for housing management companies to participate in working within their rental management software for an algorithm that identifies tenants based on known risk factors to flag tenants with behaviors that will lead to eviction likely, like late payments, utilities being turned off, requests for extensions, and it will automatically connect those people with community resources like Utah Community Action and the one I heard being represented there in Cedar City earlier, Canyons, whatever, which sounded great, to be able to help people avoid that eviction by giving them some support. Representative Jennifer Daly Provost will also have a bill on those treble damages, making it up to the court. And because several of the judges have expressed some frustration that they can't get in there and say, wait, this is not an circumstance where I think that the mandatory treble damages were helpful. Again, we're the only state in the nation with that policy. All these other states are able to function without it. And the research showed that when we have evictions, it's not the landlords being made whole. Maybe it's attorneys, but it's not the landlords. Just referencing back to the presentation by the woman from the Canyons group earlier, part of the information I learned in that working group is that 38% of the people in Utah County homeless shelter are fleeing domestic violence. And I think this is really important for you as owners to know that you are very fortunate to be working with a property management company that really has awareness for these issues and is trying to keep you as a property manager whole and reduce evictions in any way possible, and is aware of the high percentage of people influenced by domestic violence. I mentioned Representative Marcia Judkins, who I've been working with. She will have a bill to make a sheet on the lease that will include every cost associated with that lease. It's a very high cost housing market right now, and rental market. And we can see how much they've been going up in this chart here. And her bill will just make it very clear what those costs are in the lease, so that as me as a tenant, my child as your tenant, they can look and see all the costs and be ready to take them on and know that it's within their budget to make those payments. So that is a win-win for tenants and landlords to have the costs clear. We've also been working on having a sliding scale for garnishments. She'll have a bill for this, that when someone is making debt payments through their garnishment of their salary, federally, that's capped at 25%. It can't be more than 25% of your income. But if you're low income, maybe 25% is going to push you out of housing. So this sliding scale would allow a lower rate of payment for low income people and allow them to continue making their housing payments. So this is, again, is a win for landlords. When we've met with people, we've heard that from Salt Lake City community and neighborhoods that application fees are one of the big barriers to people getting back into housing. So the Utah Rental Housing Association, on their website, I worked with them last year. We discussed rental application fees, and they said, well, we want to solve this on their own. So on their website, they have a rental application fee dispute fund, and they have put $10,000 into that. And they will work with people who feel that they are not getting back their application fee. And I've heard from other stakeholders that Paul Smith and Senator Cullimore, when they're out teaching people about how to be landlords, that they are really working on spreading best practices about application fees and this resource. I will have a bill that will, based on that previous slide that we were looking at on the increase in rental fees. So if we look at that, no, that one that we just were at, that one, yes. So if we look at Salt Lake County, that's been a 9% change in rental fees in the last year. I have talked with constituents who've called me about other issues, but as we're talking, they say, wow, my child just had a 50% increase in their rent in one move. So I know that most of you, I really do know this, I'm saying this sincerely, I know most of you would never do that to a tenant, but there are people that are doing that, or companies that are doing this. And so this bill that I have would say, as a tenant, you get 90 days notice from your landlord or property manager if the rent will increase by 10% or $100, whichever's less. This is a bill that will help people stay in housing, and it's no cost to the landlord because they're still paying their rent, and they just have a little longer to continue paying that rent before they leave and find something, hopefully, that they will be able to stay housed. That is our goal. Now I am going to move to I'll talk about homelessness. We can go back. Well, no, let's go to that short-term rental piece right here. I've also been in a working group on short-term rentals. The Utah League of Cities and Towns asked the Kempsey Gardner Foundation to do a report, and that is a link to the short-term rental inventory. This is a report that was done by Kempsey Gardner, and maybe just that one page is linked there. Oh, no, there's more. Okay, so they did this great report, and it shows that the short-term rentals are increasing throughout the state, and in those areas that are bright red, that's where they're increasing more. It's in places like Cottonwood Heights, where I live and represent, where it's close to the canyons and going up more. For me, I'm really glad I've been able to be involved with this working group. We had this in a bill last session, and it was part of the big housing bill, the 426 bill. And then at the last minute, it was removed because this is such a controversial issue in many ways and a complex issue. So it was not addressed last session, but Representative Calvin Musselman from Ogden area was tasked with a working group. And I've asked him if I could join the working group, and he graciously allowed that. And we have met throughout the interim with all stakeholders, and both of us will leave that working group with bills. His bill will address cleanup, and it will address that not well language from 2017 that said that you couldn't use the advertisement in litigation for a city. His bill will say that that advertisement can be part of a court case that a city might present when they have a short-term rental that they're very unhappy with for whatever reasons. So that will be helpful for local control to have that cleared up. And his bill will also say, if you own a short-term rental, you need to apply for your own sales tax license. Nationwide, the platforms like Airbnb, they testified in a court case in Nevada that they have had $2.6 billion in taxes remitted through them. And they like to keep that money and use it as a slush fund to continue investing in the housing market. And because of that practice, it's important that our owners of short-term rentals need to have their own sales tax license. And Representative Musselman will also have part of his bill will be a pilot program that cities can opt to be part of. And some of the things in that pilot program are going to be in a bill that I have that will be more of a proactive bill. Because I had the bill open last session on short-term rentals, I was approached by a national expert, Julie Davies. She is a Utah native. She worked in the hotel industry here in management. She teaches how to do short-term rentals at Utah Valley University, at Utah Tech University, and in online courses. And she has owned and operated short-term rentals for many years. So she is a friend of this industry, but also sees some bad practices coming into our state and other states. So she's been a part of this working group, and she's very knowledgeable and has just seen where short-term rentals have made it so, like in some communities in Florida, near Air Force bases, there is no housing available that is for people to live in. It is all short-term rentals. And so that's a horrible thing to happen when people can't live in the community where they work, where they go to school. And we do not want that kind of thing happening here in Utah. And it is happening in places like Springdale. I have heard that that is one area that really is now completely short-term rental or second homes. No one can hardly live there that works there. And that's not what we want to have happen. That's bad for our infrastructure of roads. It's bad for community, sense of community and leadership in that community when people that work there can't live there. So I am just going to briefly describe some of the things in this bill that I have that really comes from this expert, Julie Davies. And it's still in process, and I would be glad, Derek is welcome to share my email. It's glbennion@le.utah.gov. And I listen to my constituents, and I listen to you as landlords. So I welcome your feedback. But one of the things we need to do is go through our code and make sure that the terms are correct and that we don't have unnecessary lawsuits because the code uses the word lease. These are not leases. in a short-term rental. This is a rental. Also, there are some things that she would require that are hard for our municipalities to accept, but I welcome this opportunity to share with you and to just ponder this with you. She would say that all municipalities in our state need to invest in writing their own short-term rental code, because if it's not in your community now, it will. And she saw this happen in Kanab. She talked with the leaders there and said, do you have your own short-term rental policy? And they said, no, we don't have short-term rental issues here. And then in a few years later, they were sorry that they didn't have some policy in place, because then a lot of people moved in during the pandemic and started having a lot of short-term rentals in Kanab. If they'd had some policies in place at their local level first, they would have been better prepared for that. I'm going to just read from the bottom of this bill, our goals, and I think you'll like the goals. The goals are to create a more level playing field for all lodging properties, including hotels, to address health and safety concerns and bring in more revenue from the TRT and fees, to limit short-term rental growth while addressing the demand. There's a great demand for it. To create better consistency and fairness throughout the state, support local governance, strengthen code enforcement efforts, and incentivize short-term rental hosts to become code compliant. Another part of, so this would be in Representative Musselman's pilot program, and also part of this bill, if not as a requirement, at least as a strong recommendation, that communities need to have a grace period for those properties that are not in Utah. 90% of short-term rentals are not legally operating, 90%. And so if we don't allow them to have a grace period to come forward to their municipality and say, I would like to get licensed, I would like to have an inspection and see if I'm code compliant, part of that process would weed out those that are not code compliant. For example, I have been told by constituents in Cottonwood Heights that they're very concerned because in a residential area where it is not zoned to have short-term rental, someone purchased a long-term rental and turned it into a short-term rental, and he's added 2 more kitchens, so that in one residential home, there will be 3 different groups coming in to rent out that home. And I think each of you can think about where you live. If you're in a residential area, would you want to have a home like that in your neighborhood? So if we had a grace period, that operator could come forward and try to get granted into the program, and he would not make it, because he would not make one of the other provisions of this state code would say you're limited to 1 rental per unit. So there would be enough give that they would be able to close off some of these illegal short-term rentals, but have enough of these legally
Looks like, there we go. She's back now. You froze there a little bit.
Okay. Sorry, have I been out for long?
About 10 seconds or so.
Okay, good. Okay. And I will just go a little bit longer and then let you ask questions. I would not have been pressing for some of these things if I hadn't been in contact with Julie for the amount of time that I have, for about 8 months, and learning from her experience and her seeing she has gone to conferences here in Utah where she has heard platforms or developers targeting Utah for further short-term rentals. And again, we are a state, maybe in some states that's okay, but the other thing I focus on is water. And as I am trying to do everything I and our state can to save Great Salt Lake, to address we've had a good winter so far, but it would take like 5 winters like this to make up the deficit that we have in our state in water. So we can't just keep building in our state. It doesn't work. We have to build smart, and we have to have homes that give us housing. One of the in this bill, there would be maximum occupancy rates for short-term rentals. If you're going to have 50 or 30 people, that's not a short-term rental. That's a lodge or an inn, and you should get a different license from your city. It would also, what I love about this bill, there would be a definition of what can be a short-term rental and what cannot. Apartments, affordable housing, sheds, these things are not short-term rentals. We don't want that moving into our housing that people need. I will stop speaking. I'm here at the Zion Bank Technology Center, and I'm back into another meeting right at 1. So I will give you 5 minutes for questions.
All right. Looks like nobody. So you're off the hook. So thank you so much,
Okay.
Representative Bennion. If you
All
have any
right.
questions, like I said, when we do this recording, we'll make sure everyone has her contact information. So if you have any questions on stuff she's proposing or any concerns that you guys have on your end, feel free to reach out. She's really responsive. And like I said, I consider her a friend. She's been great. So thanks again.
Thank you.